You are watching Gouche Live featuring this man right there, Paul Rosen, brought to you by the good people of the Hockey News.
And the great people at Paramount Sport Management.
We've got a great show. This is Mental Health Mondays. Chuck Bassey's with us. We got an incredible guest. But first, I got to do this.
What is that a Tampa Bay Lightning? I can't see it.
It's a Toronto Maple Leaf one.
Oh, I couldn't see. I can't see it.
No, but everybody was saying, Gooch, why do you got it upside down? Well, for the last couple of days, I've been wearing my Winnipeg Jets upside down because it was at half mast. I knew you got it. And your Chicago Blackhawks are still in it. And then when we bring Chuck up, his Philadelphia Flyers are still in it. But what's ironic about that, Paul, is that the Flyers are playing the Canadiens. One of the all-time greatest power forwards, Keith Primo, played for the Flyers, and now his son is the third backup goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. Who is Keith going for?
He's going for the Canadiens. He's going for his son. Of course. You know the thing, though, that you say, Gooch, about the Flyers, the Flyers were always in. They were one of the top four teams, and they went through it 3-0. I watched all three of their games. They are for real. Like, they could do some damage. One of the crazy things, though, Gucci, is that, Toronto, the East games are played in Toronto at Scotiabank. The West games are played at the Rogers Centre in Edmonton. Yet Edmonton and Toronto, they're both out. Their dressing rooms are being used by somebody else.
Well, you know what? And we've got Stephen Morris on with us today. And, I certainly want to discredit anybody in the sense that, we make fun a little bit about our mental health issues that we've gone through in our lives. So, again, if we can't laugh at ourselves, who can we laugh at? But I'll tell you what, listening to the Sport Talk Radio today here in Toronto, never give up. Oh, my God. It's like, holy, it's a moratorium. All right. You know what that means?
You tell me.
Come on. Hey, before you get started, Chuck.
Yeah.
You've had some lean years yourself. So don't forget that. And you've had awful goaltending until you got Hart.
Oh my God. Carter Hart. I started working with John Stevenson, which is Carter Hart's sports psychologist. And Carter's been with him since he's been 10 years old. And just in dealing with John, I know exactly why Carter Hart is going to be so great. And everyone else right now is just seeing a little sniff of what we've been knowing for 3-4 years right now. And I have no doubt the reason why his foundation is so solid and why he's so strong mentally. And technically, he's incredible right now. So we're in for some really good years with Carter Hart.
Paul,
I tell you what, Chuck. I've met him a few times, being a Canadian goaltender, and with Hockey Canada, you get to do a lot of really cool things. And he not only is a hell of a goalie, but he's a real good kid. He's got his head on his shoulders right. And the last real solid goaltender for the Flyers was Pelle Lindbergh, and I think they're going a long way with this kid. I really do. I watched their 3 games in the preliminary round, and they looked good going 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, they've had highlight reel goals from their offense. I'm just going to step in with you and say that you probably forgot about Ron Hextall, who won a Vezina Trophy and a Conn Smythe as well with the Flyers after Lindbergh.
Well, I loved Ronnie. I try not to say that because of people that know me. They always compare the way I played with Hextall with the dirtiness, and I hate bringing it up because Hextall was so much more than a dirty goalie.
All right, well, I'll bring it up. Sorry, Paul, finish. I apologize. I was just going to jump in.
But he was an incredible goalie, so I don't forget about him to make him one of the best of all time. Just a lot of people that don't know the game bring up his crazy side and not his goaltending side.
I think anybody who knows the game knows that Ron Hextall was a great goalie.
Yeah. I love him. He's also from my home province. How many cups did he win?
He won 0.
Oh, my God. Okay, let's move on.
Last two finals.
Losing team. When Edmonton beat Philly, he played incredible.
All right.
Yeah.
No Stanley Cups. Hey, listen, we could speak all day. We're not going to do that because we could talk all night about hockey. But I'm really excited about our guest because it is Mental Health Mondays. And thank you, Chuck, for setting this up with Paul and I. I just think it's so important that we have a opportunity to talk. I read the information that Stephen had sent over to me. Wow, incredible. And I'll tell you what, I would say this is almost the new wave. And this is what's needed. And I'm hoping to hear the things that are he's actually described are able to be delivered, because this is the only way we're going to get ourselves out of it. Obviously, Paul, you going through your trials and tribulations with mental health, your story is very well documented yourself, Chuck. And of course, with my sister, it was a mess. So I'm really looking forward to this and talking to Stephen about what we can do collectively. Obviously, the three of us are not psychotherapists, though we've in our past we've needed it. I think it's important that the industry listens to people that are living through it, that have gotten through it. We're all still, as you know, Paul, yourself, you can say it, you fight every day to keep it in check. I just think we have to have a cohesive working arrangement with everybody involved, doctors, family members, the afflicted, and we have to work together rather than just being one linear. Your thoughts on that, Paul?
No, I agree 100%. You know, I'm really looking forward to listening to Stephen and just getting briefed for a few minutes from Chuck. I'm really looking forward to seeing this. You know, I spent 17 days in the psychiatric ward at Toronto General. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. It'll be 19 months. I'm clean and sober for the first time in 35 years. So I'm very interested in listening to what he has to say.
All righty. Chuck.
Yeah, I've known Steve for about 10 years now, and Steve is probably one of my most dearest trusted confidants and colleagues that I would go to with any question or problem that I have in my life, or people that I love and would want the best for. So he's got a wonderful story. He is a survivor, and his resilience is inspiring. So I'm just going to leave it for Steve Morris to tell the rest of the story and bring us some new insights into mental health and awareness.
All right. Well, I really want to thank all of our listeners and viewers coming on. As you know, we have some very loyal people. Aaron Kuzak woke up this morning to watch this. He is in Melbourne, Australia, and I think under the circumstances they are in, he certainly needs to listen to this, because you know, it is disastrous over in Australia right now, and the mental health issue must just be exploding. And a case, of course, Michelle Bertz, all the way from Germany, and Larry, of course, a Winnipeg Jets fan. Listen, without further ado, let's introduce our listeners to Stephen Morris, who is a registered psychotherapist with the CRPO and a Canadian certified addiction counselor, CCAC, with the CACCF.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah,
CAFC, and there he is, Stephen. What's going on?
Those are a lot of fancy letters behind my name, eh?
Oh my God! Problem is, my name is only AFS.
Yeah,
you know what it stands for. Well, thank you for joining us, Chuck. Thank you for organizing it. First and foremost, we will let you tell us who you are. Sure. Obviously, this is called Mental Health Mondays. We put it together, as you've heard, and Paul will tell you a little bit of his story. He has suffered through mental health and addiction through his lifetime. I know you know Chuck's story, and of course mine comes from more my sister situation that she lived through. So we all understand it to some degree, but please enlighten us on more.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, currently I'm an addiction counsellor with the Canadian Mental Health Association in the city of Brampton. I've been doing that there now for several years. Came in when we started this program in 2016. Prior to that, I was working as an addiction support worker on what's called the Assertive Community Treatment Team in Brampton. It's one of the most I don't know how to describe that. It's one of the most intense mental health and addiction support programs that there is inside of Ontario and across Canada. And then before that, I had a lot of experience working in residential treatment for addiction and mental health at a number of different programs. Also on an outreach program as an addiction support worker there. Did that for a number of years. Obviously, straight after my schooling, I was a bit late getting into the schooling for psychology and addiction counselling. The reason it was a bit late is because prior to all of that stuff, I was addicted to alcohol and drugs myself and a number of other things, along with some of the anxiety and depression that was hitting me pretty hard at those times too. So Been on a bit of a mission really since sobering up myself and going through all that education and just trying to get across to people. I think more than anything, I mean, you touched a little bit on it in the intro there. I think it's important to get as much education out to people as we possibly can around the reasons why people struggle with these things. I think the main thing for me is that we need to focus on really what the problem is that's underneath the surface. I tend to find a lot of the things that we deal with these days, a lot of the programs that are out there, a lot of the things that have been around for a really long time, have a tendency of focusing on what the surface issues are. So the alcohol, the drugs, the mental health, and they're actually basically with the alcohol and drugs, they're the solution to the problem. They're not the problem itself. That's the thing that the person turns to in order to cope with what's really going on underneath the surface. So when we focus all our attention in treatment on just that particular aspect of it, we're not really getting to the problem that's underneath the surface. I kind of liken it to if you went to see a doctor with a cough, and that particular doctor gave you some medication to get rid of that cough. You went away, and in a month later you came back with a cough again, and he gave you the same medication. And you went away, and a month later you came back. Sooner or later he's got to say, hold on a sec, what's causing this cough? Or, before he just keeps giving you that medication. And I think we're getting to a point now inside of the field of working with mental health and addiction that we are actually starting to look at what the problems are now, but it's taken us a long time to get to that point, and we've gone through a lot of heartache for a lot of people, I think, before we've gotten to this point.
Chuck, I know you want to say hello to your buddy.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for being on the show, man. Really
No worries, man. Yeah, good to see you too.
I wanted to ask you the difference between basically based what you just said on treating the symptom and not the root cause analysis of that. I mean, there's always trauma going to occur in all of our lives.
Right.
So I'd just like to hear you speak to the capacity that people have in trauma. Obviously, some people who aren't addicts don't have the ability to empathize or really understand what the capacity is for the person who suffered with the mental health illness or the addiction issues, because their capacity is a little different.
Yeah, absolutely. The really interesting thing about that for me is that when people have experienced that kind of trauma, they often get labeled inside of the system as being difficult to work with, hard to, they don't want it, or they're not really looking to do the kind of work that's needed in these kind of things. The issue with it is that when you've experienced that kind of trauma, it's your brain and your central nervous system. Please, I'm not a brain surgeon or anything like that. This is just through the training with addiction and trauma and all the different things that I've been trained on. Your central nervous system itself creates a situation when you've experienced trauma where you're almost like just on the brink of being activated into what's known as fight or flight. Yeah. You're constantly just sitting on the edge of it. So for most people, a little bit of anxiety or fear or something that gets activated, it takes a while to build up that level where you're into that fight or flight situation. For people that have experienced a lot of trauma in their life, they're sitting just at the lip, so just a little bit kind of overflows the cup. And when that cup gets overflown, your brain actually starts to shut down certain systems in order to deal with a fight or flight response. So basically, you've got to get out of there as fast as you can, or you've got to fight. You've got to have this big burst of energy. And your brain will also shut down non-essential systems. So like parts of your digestive system will get shut down, because basically the way that it looks at it is that, if you're faced with a saber-toothed tiger and this is a fight or flight situation, you really don't need to, concentrate about digesting your own food or rationally and logically thinking things through, because, you're going to get eaten if you don't. So quite often people with trauma will present with this, often considered to be over-emotional, reacting to things like over the top. They'll also present with difficulty sleeping, which is the extra energy that's given, and often with things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, because the digestive system isn't working that way, and it's actually your body working exactly how it's supposed to when it's been activated that way. The other thing that it does is it shuts down part of your brain that's responsible for the executive functions. So logical thinking, rational thinking, impulse control, those kind of things. Yeah, out the door, gone. So you're basically you're just reacting to the emotion. So what happens when people get activated like that is that quite often we'll ask them to do like cognitive exercises and think things through, and what were you thinking at that time, and they can't do it because they're not meant to do it, because they've been activated that way and they're not capable of doing it. And unfortunately, in the past, what we've done is we've labelled people as being difficult to work with and sent them off into other programs, whereas in actuality, what they're doing is they're working exactly how they're supposed to.
Gotcha.
So it can be really challenging, right? When somebody comes in the door and you're doing the initial intakes and they're talking about the physical issues that they're experiencing as well with the mental health, quite often there's a very strong connection between those two. There's a ton of stuff that's out there right now around anxiety and pain, and how when anxiety is high, if there's an underlying pain issue, the two just go hand in hand. So I think slowly but surely we're starting to get educated on it, but I still think there's a long way to go, especially for people in the public who are trying to deal with this maybe at a family level. It's really difficult when quite often people, I used to run a family program at one of the residential settings that I worked at, and quite often people come into those programs saying, well, he just needs to stop. Why can't he just stop? Everything will be fine. And we know that that's not the case, because if he stops doing that, he's going to turn to something else to cope, because it's not that's the problem, it's what's underneath.
Well said.
Stephen, nice to meet you. Paul Rosen here. Listen, I want to ask you a question about treatment centers. I loved listening to you when you just said that stop. I had addiction issues for 35 years, and people in my family used to always say, why can't you stop? And simplest question in the world. I could never do it. But so in January 30th of 2019, I tried to take my life, and it didn't work, but I ended up spending 17 days at psychiatric ward in Toronto General. Learned a lot about our system when I was there, and maybe off camera we can talk, and I can ask questions about that. I don't think we have the time now, but one of the things that still haunted me when they came to me to talk to me about an in-house program was and I started my addictions when I was a teenager in the 70s. Right. But in 1993, I went to a place called Harmony House in Kirkland Lake for 90 days. I was there about 4 days, and then I was approached by somebody in the house to buy stuff, which always baffled me because I was there for an addiction situation. Right. And I ended up taking more stuff when I was in there than when I was out. Right. And it still scares me to this day. Are we getting better in our treatment centers, or there's still stuff like this going on?
That's a delicate one to answer.
Hot seat.
So, I mean, in my experience inside of working in residential treatment, I've worked in a number of different places. I think it's still an issue. You're always going to get people going into those facilities that are there for the wrong reasons. Put it that way. I think the vast majority of people who go into treatment are genuinely looking to try to make some changes. They just don't know how. Half of them don't even know what's going on most of the time when it comes to that stuff. They're like, why can't I stop? Like you're saying, asking yourself that question over and over again. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but sometimes you get people who are in there because maybe they've been forced in by a family member or told to be there by a legal situation or something like that. Those kind of situations play out. And unfortunately, when it's like that, sometimes you get people that do smuggle it in. So it is still going. The checks that are done on people, sometimes though, that's one of the things that about the residential treatment facilities that sometimes, I went through residential treatment myself, so sometimes kind of horrifies me a little bit, is that it's a huge step for somebody to go into residential treatment. It takes away a choice around things. It's causing you to really look at your life. It's causing you to really, say, yes, I've got a problem, and give away the control of that. I've got no control over this anymore. I need help. I can't do it. And then we show up at these residential facilities, and number one, we're put through a rigorous check before we get in, which at any point we can be told, no, sorry, we're not taking you because you said something wrong or you did something wrong as you were coming in. Everything is completely searched, pulling everything out of it. And then when you've gone through that and you get on the other side, you occasionally get yourself exposed to somebody who's managed to go through all that and still get something into the facility. So it is a problem. I do think it's getting better. I do think that slowly but surely we're getting a really good handle on that. more so, and I don't have any experience in the paid for stuff. That's one thing I just want to say. Like, every residential treatment that I've worked at has always been a government funded. So in my opinion, in the government funded stuff, yes, we're starting to get a handle on it, but it is still an issue that's there. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
You warmed me up. Steven, you warmed me up. Listen, I don't want to make this all about me and my sister, but I think it's really important. Let's take the personal part out of it. Paul, thank you for sharing your story. It's very important for people to understand. The only way we're going to get through this is if we communicate and we get like-minded people together around a table, and we can be able to discuss. Just because you have DR behind your name doesn't give you the right to treat the people the way they're being treated. And I'm not here to bash the system. I'm not here to degrade any of the system or how they're, it's just that I want to read you this, and I think we've all heard it, and I've lived it. And so I have the right to say what I say because I've been there. I've been, as Paul would know, in the darkest, deepest sides through it with my sister. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. A very smart man said that, Einstein. We are doing the exact same things. I just want to read you one thing, and then I'll leave it because, Stephen, I look forward to meeting you personally because I think my story and Paul's story can share with you an opportunity. I'm 61. I hope we can do it before I die. I think people need to listen and understand from the people that are affected on the outside and watching and trying to help the system. This is my sister's documents that were done. All right. She lost $8 million. She lost 2 beautiful children because our system took it away from her. Yes, she had a problem. No question. I'll just read one statement and then you can comment on it. Mrs. McCarthy, who happened to be my sister's last name, case involves an individual who suffers from multiple substance abuse problems with an extensive family history of alcoholism. Unfortunately, it appears that Mrs. McCarthy also suffers from other concurrent psychiatric problems, which are well documented in her psychological evaluation. That was written against her so she could lose her children. It's a legal document from the lawyers. Right. My question to you is that taking her kids away from her, she didn't kill anybody. She was hurting herself. Taking the kids away from her and not giving her any visitation, zero visitation, killed her. Paul can attest to that, with my sister not having her children. So my question is, who's running the nut house? How can they allow that to happen? I know it's difficult, and I'm not asking you to be, obviously explaining everything about it, but we are all 4 intelligent individuals here. I never bore a child. I didn't even have children. But I could just watch this. That in itself, could you not figure out a system where you say, okay, listen, you have a problem. You didn't kill anybody, so here's what we're going to do. Every week, we're going to give you 15 minutes with your children. And as you perform better and better, and you go through all these checklists, we're going to give you half an hour. And then we're going to give you 45 minutes, and then an hour, and then a week. Not only did it destroy her life, it destroyed my mother's life. And you know what? I'm sure it's going to destroy her children's life. My question to you is, how do we make change?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's an awful situation, and my heart bleeds for you and your family to go through that, as anybody who has to go through that kind of stuff. Addiction is a family disease. When it impacts one person in that environment, it impacts every single person. No two ways about that. Unfortunately, there's some very strong legislation around our ethical responsibilities when it comes to those kind of things, which some people, it depends on your interpretation of that, I guess. And I don't want to get into the politics behind that or anything like that. I don't want to be controversial. I mean, we're supposed to, in my role, for example, we're supposed to report if there is a person actively using substances and they're in charge of a minor. And then where it goes from there is into that legal system that you're talking about. From our point of view as an agency at CMHA, where I work currently, we're really, obviously, we're very upfront about that if those things are going on, then we have an obligation to report that. But it's not an obligation the way that we approach it nowadays, is that it's not an obligation where we're just going to tell them they're going to come and take your kids and it's gone. we're going to have a conversation with you about that, about a way that we can work together in order to make that situation safe for everybody that's involved in it. So I do believe that it depends on the not the situation, but the people who are involved in that situation and how they read the letter of the law.
Right. And I'd like to further on, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Our story is to help others. So
Yeah.
what I lived through is, listen, we all can't go back and change what's happened to us, but what we can do is learn from it and help the next people going through it. So I'm just going to, and you guys can get back into this right after this one. The issue that bothers me about that is we understand that it's a family issue. Why was I personally shut out? I've never taken drugs. I've never been an issue. So they shut me completely out and allowed her to fend for herself, who was ill. And so they allowed her to go to a lawyer and try and get herself out of this circumstances. Yeah. And yet I was living with her, with my wife, taking care of the children.
Yep.
And I still, to that day, I have not been able to see the children myself. Yeah. So I'm really confused on if we are truly trying to solve the issue. And I loved what you said in here, and I'm going to end it with this. You say, and I really appreciate it, because I've been saying this for years, and I've never heard anybody else say it, but maybe I haven't seen it before. I also think it's an opportunity to discuss the way the system is set up, and often fails people treating the symptoms of the problem and not the problem itself.
Yeah.
On my sister's deathbed, as she's laying there, and I won't be descriptive, I'm obviously a family member in tears. I think, Paul, I think I had called you on this one. And the nurse that was in there said to me, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself, because I was blaming myself, of course, because I didn't get her through it. Paul tried, I tried. And on that deathbed, as she was there, I said, I was crying, and of course my wife was trying to console me. And the nurse beside me said, don't be so hard on yourself. She brought it upon herself. And I thought for a few minutes to actually say something, and I didn't. And now it's time for us to say something. Now it's time for us to all collectively get together. If we truly want to help, especially in this pandemic where it's going to get worse and worse. I think, Paul, you and I, along with Chuck, we get together and we rally the troops, because there are people going through the exact same things we're going through. And if we continue on doing the same thing, we're going to end up. No medical person should have said that to me. And I think we need to rally the troops and make sure that we help educate all of us on how to make sure that we make a difference and not just make a statistic.
100%. I think, if it's okay if I can just say something about that. Yeah, I think that unfortunately there's a common misconception around tough love when it comes to these kind of circumstances, where it's cut them off, kick them out, put them on the street, take everything away from them, break them down, start from scratch, and then they'll rebuild themselves. I think that's a really old-fashioned misconception that should have been thrown out a long time ago. I think there's way more effective ways to work with people that are struggling with this thing, where quite often the choice has been taken away from them already by the substance, with the amount of neurotransmitters that are being produced in their brain by taking that particular substance. Quite often the brain's just been completely hijacked and there is no choice in the matter anymore. So when people look at it from that point of view, my blood was boiling as you were saying that, to be honest, inside, because it really, that's my soapbox that I get on, where people have that misconception that it's a matter of choice, and you've got to take everything away, break them down, and build them back up, because that's going to cause more damage than it will help absolutely anybody. So sorry, just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Rosie, Chuck, just before you go on to your questions, I want to just add one more thing to that. So another incident happened where, and it really goes to what you're saying. And if we can adopt this, you wrote it, so I'm saying, if this could be adopted, Paul, I'm going to send you this over. If you could adopt this in our society today, the nurse, when she was passed, they have to write something on why she died. And I overheard them discussing it. And the one nurse said she died an alcoholic. And I'm thinking, hang on a sec here. Let's take a time out. My sister did not die being an alcoholic. She died from, those are only the coping mechanisms of what the true underlying problem was. She died from mental health. So please don't take it in those words. You cannot, nobody dies an addict. Nobody dies an alcoholic. They die from, those are only the symptoms. And if we can change the mindset, we certainly are going to get farther away. That's me being on a soapbox. Thank you all for taking time to allow me to vent that.
No problem.
I actually do remember that day very well. I came in a few hours after that happened, Gooch, and Steve and I, Carrie's sister, lived with me for a little bit as we were both going through severe addiction issues. And the thing that drives me crazy, as now being almost 19 months clean and sober, is that she was a brilliant person. Like, she was we sat up some nights till 3, 4 in the morning discussing the world. And I have no education. Like, I left school in high school, but this person was brilliant. And all she wanted to do was have the opportunity to be with her family, to be with her kids, her son and her daughter. And every time that was taken away, I saw a little more go into the bottle until her liver couldn't take it. And that was the end of it. The question I want to ask you, and I don't want to get into too many personal things to get people, but as the family member, okay, like an addict myself, I'm in the psychiatric ward. My 2 daughters are coming to see me. They both had serious, it took things out of my addiction, very personal, because
absolutely,
they had to, that was happening to them. And so one of my daughters still doesn't talk to me right now. It's been quite a while. Every time I talk to another addict and we're talking about different things, I say, how long is this going to last? How long is this going to last? I'm clean and sober. I'm doing everything I need to do. You as somebody that deals with and on a daily basis, when somebody comes to you with that, like, what do you say to them? Like,
from which point of view, the family or the person from your point of view?
From the addict point of view.
Yeah, it's the only thing that you can say to that is it'll take as long as it takes as far as that person. And the only thing that you can do to try and keep that process, speed that process up, is just be consistently doing the things that you want to do that you think is going to change the way that she sees you. At the end of the day, we all have filters for the way that we listen to people and see people. Sometimes we see people because of their experiences with them. We develop filters for the way that we listen to people. And when that person makes a radical change, like the kind that you were talking about, where you've switched from, following the life of addiction into now being sober and clean and trying to be consistently doing that on a regular basis, sometimes it takes a while for that filter to shift and change for the other person. And the only thing that we can do around that is just to be consistent, constantly doing the same things and always asking the right kind of questions and being there if they need you. And sooner or later it will shift, but it's down to the individual, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to predict how long that's going to take. From the other person's point of view, if somebody comes to me and says, they're trying to do all this stuff and I don't believe them, and I've heard all this before because I've done a lot of work with families. So the things that I always say to them is, listen, this person has been dealing with some really serious addiction issues and their brain has been altered in ways that you can't imagine. One of the most important things is to try to get some kind of empathy for the things that the person with the addictions is going through. Right. And the way that I try to do that with people is I'll talk about, what's the thing that you do to cope? How do you cope with the problems that you're experiencing? This works really well with fathers a lot, because quite often they'll say, well, I get angry, and they yell and scream at them. So I'll go through a process of like, okay, so next time you feel that anger coming on and you need to cope with that emotion that's going on in there because you see your son doing that stuff, don't get angry. And they'll usually say, well, I can't not get angry. It's my son. I can't stop that. Well, now you know how he feels when he needs to use that drug, because it's the exact same thing, right?
Don't drink coffee or go to bed.
Don't drink coffee. Don't eat those cookies.
Stay up all night long.
Don't do those things that you probably think you shouldn't do, right?
Right.
Because most of the time people have no empathy for what a person with addiction goes through.
Right.
Despite the fact that there's a lot of stuff that they can empathize with, because it's all coping mechanisms. And the issue is that then what happens is that it gets vilified, it gets put out there as being this awful thing, and these people have got something wrong with them, and there's all this stigma and everything that gets attached to it. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of people that I work with are really sensitive individuals who just don't know how to cope with the emotions that come up for them.
Right.
There's a wonderful analogy around orchids and dandelions. I don't know if you've ever heard that one, around how people who deal with addictions are usually orchids. So they're very sensitive. They need the right kind of environment. They need the right kind of food and conversation and everything so that they can flourish. And the problem is they're usually surrounded by dandelions, and you can mow those buggers down and they'll just keep growing back.
Yeah, resilience.
One of the before you jump in, Chuck, one of the things that I decided to do was about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, I had somebody from the Toronto Star come and wanted to do a story on me, and I decided that if I was going to do the story, I was going to do it. I was going to be 100% honest and do everything. And I decided to use one part of it where he put it in where I talked about my mom dying of cancer and me stealing her morphine.
Right.
And there's family members that really took that hard because they think that, you know, and I thought when I was doing it, like, how disgusting can you be to do something like this? But I'm through my AA and my NA meetings. I see that this happens all the time.
All the time.
We just do what we do to survive. But then the people around us, they look at it and go, "This is disgusting." Like, how do you handle that?
And that's where that education piece has got to come in. It's really about getting people to understand that when you are addicted to something to that degree, your brain has been completely hijacked from the normal way of doing things. So it becomes like, I always remember sitting in one of my first meetings myself and hearing this guy talking about how his drug of choice became his girlfriend, it became his lover, it became his wife, his mom, his dad. It was everything, because it was way more important than any of those things. And unfortunately, because of the way that the drug interacts with us, that's exactly what it does to us. You know, not to get into too much of the neuroscience, but there's a neurotransmitter called dopamine that is basically responsible for motivating us to do things, and it's a natural neurotransmitter that we experience when we eat good food, when we get praise from people, when we do things that we get rewarded for, and it's part of the reward system in your brain. When you start using substances, the levels of dopamine go up about 10,000 times depending on the substance that you're using. So what that does is it all that stuff that you naturally experience as being rewarding, like, you know, being told that somebody loves you, being told that you've done a good job. You know, there's nothing more naturally that produces dopamine than an intimate relationship. All of that stuff just gets kicked out the window because it's just been dwarfed by the rest of this, by this substance that's just gone, listen, this is what you need to do, and it's the only thing you need to do. Right. The problem with that then is when you try to stop, is those neurotransmitters, obviously they stop working, but your brain, in order to cope, has shut down the receptors. So now you're not automatically just going to start feeling the natural pleasure and reward that you would, because those receptors are like, no, not going to do that. So quite often we fall into like a depression, and, you know, there's all sorts of things going on for us in that circumstance as well. The biggest thing is just educating people around the way that the brain's just been hijacked. And I used to, when I run the family group, I used to say that, listen, you don't hate the person, you hate the addiction. And that's the piece to concentrate on, because it's not his natural way of behaving. If you remove that substance and allow him to recover and allow him to get back to where he's naturally supposed to be, that's not his natural way of behaving. It's the addiction that's hijacked his brain, and that's the part that you hate.
Right. I appreciate that. Chuck, you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a great point there. I mean, Steve, I could talk to you for days about this, but I think
I thought I almost got you lost for words there, Chuck. I was going to say, that's got to be a first.
Which really rarely happens ever. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to try and take this off of me, and I'd like to try and connect this to the audience and people who are going to watch this as well, because there's COVID going on right now. And obviously this has exposed a lot more underlying conditions that people are dealing with coping mechanisms, stress, kids that are being at home, balancing jobs, having kids that are just, you know, stressed to the wazoo. I've seen you in action. I've seen you actually leading and facilitating inside it, and I'm a better man for that, for seeing you work. I know your platform is a little different from your view versus what you were educated in when you started this journey almost 10 years ago. So I wanted to kick it back to, you know, the Liberation Place and what your work is doing, and being able to see what the distinction that's different from your view of mental health and addiction, because you brought something up that was very poignant. Nobody chooses to be an addict.
Yeah.
Nobody chooses to be their lowest part of their human being that they could possibly drop to. Nobody chooses not to want to see their kids. Nobody chooses to want to be a terrible daughter or wife or husband or son or whatever like that is. But I mean, you have a different view than what I would say the legislation has on it. You know, what we look at mental health and addiction as well. So I just want to go back to Liberation Place and have you be able to speak to the people and say what is the future now for people understanding mental health moving forward, being able to support them. Like you said, you don't hate the person, you hate the addiction, and how to have people have more empathy and understanding for your view on what we need to change in the system.
What we need to change in the system. Wow, how long have we got? I think first of all, just to talk about the platform that I try to work from, Chuck.
Yeah.
It's my point of view. So quite often the problems that we come across when we're faced by what's known as the medical model, which is a model of treatment for people who are dealing with addiction and mental health problems. Anything inside of the medical world, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of whatever the problem is. So if the problem is that you've got, there's a diabetes, then there's medication that you take, and we're trying to get that down. If there's a broken bone and we're treating it in a medical model, we want to fix that bone to get rid of the pain. It's the way that the medical model looks at it, is to get rid of things. When you apply that logic to working with people with addiction and mental health, it tends to create more problems than it actually fixes, because trying to get rid of those things, when you're talking about emotions and when you're talking about feelings and thoughts that are going on for a person that are linked to childhood experiences, that are linked to issues with trauma, that any depression, anxiety, any schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, where people are hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there, and you're trying to tell somebody that it's wrong and we need to get rid of that. When we try to push those things away, naturally they just come back stronger. So the more that we try to get rid of it, the more that it keeps coming back. It's almost like, if you think about it in terms of, if you say to somebody, don't think about yellow taxis or don't think about pink elephants, instantly somebody starts thinking about it. And the more you try not to think about it, the more that you're actually thinking about it. And it's the same thing with your emotions. It's the same thing with feelings. It's the same thing with those thoughts. When you're trying to say that they're wrong and push them away, they just keep coming back tenfold. So the platform that I work from is to develop a system within a family environment, because, as I said before, addiction is a family disease. It's not just for the individual. So we want to embrace the whole family into the process, where we're hopefully having conversations around educating the members of the family that are looking for that education, also supporting the individual that's dealing with the addiction and mental health issues. But also what we're looking to do is we're looking to embrace what's going on for the individual as far as a coping mechanism, and not push it away, but learn new ways to cope with whatever it is that's underneath the surface, while at the same time going to work on what that problem is underneath the surface. So we're looking to just build from a platform of really, honestly, it's a very unusual thing. Most people, when I say this, kind of look at me a bit strange. We're looking to actually embrace the addiction and figure out, what is it that's going on. If you ask somebody nowadays around when they first stop using, one of the first questions that I ask, and people look at me a bit messed up, is, what did you love about using? Most people will be like, why are you asking them that? You're triggering them. Don't ask them those questions. They're going to want to run and use. Well, my response to that is, no, if you tell me what you love about using, now we've got to figure out how you're going to get that without using, because that's the thing you were doing to cope. Like, what made me feel like I belonged. It made me feel like I was, I was the life and soul of the party. It gave me confidence. Okay, so now we know why you were using. There's all this stuff that's going on underneath, and often it's a lot deeper than that. But we ask those questions because we want to embrace that. We don't want to push it away. The more you push it away, the more that's going to create problems when it comes back 10 times stronger.
It's funny you say that. That's awesome, because I've never had, when I went into the psych ward, and then I went to an addiction center in Aurora and started with my addiction doctor, and that nobody's ever asked me that question.
Yeah, one of the first things I ask, so what do you love about it?
Yeah.
Most of them, they look at me like, what? Because
Yeah.
it's not normally the question that you would ask, right? What you're looking for is, you're trying to figure out, okay, so you're doing this for this reason. So how are we going to create that in another way? Right? How are we going to build that confidence? How are we going to get you to see that you can fit in? But also, there's a lot of work that you can do around that, about what's going on underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you look at pros, there's exercises that they do with pros and cons. Right. What are the pros? Are you doing this? What are the cons? When you look at the pros, it's like, okay, those are the things that we need to try and enhance without the substance. When you look at the cons, okay, these are the things that we're going to use to motivate you.
Yeah.
I don't believe in rock bottom. This is my own personal opinion. I don't believe in the term rock bottom. I think that it's a term that gets overused. I believe it's more of the people don't see the advantages of changing behavior compared to the advantages of staying where they're at. And it's a matter of pointing out what that motivation is to change, and trying to build on that, so that the person can see that place is a place that they want to be, as opposed to the place where they are right now. When I spent like probably 10 or 15 years living in a very different life myself, the motivation for me to go in that direction was nowhere near as much as it was to stay where I was. Unfortunately, even if something isn't the healthiest for us, when it's comfortable and when it feels like, you know, it's easy for us to do, we will stay there. So it's about trying to develop that motivation to change rather than constantly trying to point out how somebody's hit rock bottom. Because again, all you're doing is you're adding on to guilt and shame if somebody's not changing. When you're asking questions like, why haven't you hit rock bottom yet? It's pointing out to the person again that there's something wrong with me. I'm experiencing guilt and shame already, and you're piling that on. So I'm just going to go and keep doing that to get rid of it.
You know, I want to just ask you one quick question for family, for people that are watching us now, that are maybe not the addict, but the family.
Yeah, sure.
People used to say to me all the time, I don't get how, like, I was married 24 years. I would, you know, how does your family not know what you're doing for years? I had the same room when I played for Canada. I had the same roommate for almost 7 years. He was a part of this little segment they did on me. He said, I thought he was going through an issue with a girl. I had no clue that he had this addiction. Like, so how does, like, I know for me as the addict, we can be the greatest, you know, we
manipulation becomes a way of life. Like,
I should have had an Oscar sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
But how to the family members watching, how can they miss this?
Well, I mean, you're stepping into the realms of what's called codependency. When people are dealing with a loved one, a family member, or, you know, a really close friend, a husband, wife, whatever it is that's dealing with these issues, quite often they might have a feeling that something's going on, but they're not quite sure. But they become very immersed in what's going on for that other person. And the only thing that they can do inside of those circumstances, number one, is that there's no way that you're going to be able to give a list of things that you look for to see addiction in somebody, because everybody is unique and everybody's different. That's the thing about treating this particular illness, is that it's not like ABC, XYZ, and, you know, you follow these things and that's the way it's going to be. Everybody is unique because everybody has had unique experiences throughout their life. So in other words, they see the world very differently. When we see the world very differently, you're talking about a person's perception, and that person's perception obviously is their reality. I'm getting into the psychotherapy of it now. I got to back away from that. So what that person will learn ways to hide that particular coping mechanism because it's seen as being their survival. They manipulate, they find ways to make it happen. They've got a million excuses. Quite often when somebody, I don't know about yourself, Paul, but when people sober up, quite often one of the biggest reliefs is that they don't have to tell lies anymore. You know, we haven't got to worry about what we said to Buddy last Thursday about why we weren't at that particular thing, or why we needed to take that money, or why we didn't show up with that piece, because, you know, I haven't made a story up. I'm being honest about what's going on for me right now, so I don't have to remember the different lies. So when it comes to the family members, obviously, if you think there's something going on, it's just about being supportive, trying to be there, trying to ask questions. But also, the most important thing about family members is making sure to remember to take care of yourself. Always make sure that you're looking after yourself inside of that particular situation, no matter how difficult it gets. And that can be really, really challenging at times. But that becomes the most important, because in the work that I've done with family members, number one, they don't see it coming, and there's really nothing that you can do to help people see it coming in that aspect, right? Particularly if that person's become really, really good at hiding it and manipulating people and making people believe what it is that they're saying. But when it does hit, it's about remembering to take care of yourself, because I've watched people in the time that I've been working with family members where you can just see the deterioration physically, you can hear the deterioration psychologically in the way that they're talking about things. And in my opinion, codependency is a killer just as much as addiction is. And also the codependence, as far as I'm concerned, is also a form of the process addiction to me. People become addicted to the addict.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I wish I would have met you many, many years ago.
If you'd have met me many years ago, I wasn't like this, though.
Yeah, well, I wish I would have met you now, many years ago.
He was not
anyway
you would have liked Gouche.
Can I go back to the future?
Yeah.
Whatever. No, but seriously, I must just say, listening to you is wonderful to hear this, because it's enlightening and it's comforting. Actually, I'm going to be honest with you, to hear that there is hope. I gave up hope. Once I lost my sister, I wanted to do a bunch of things and pound the door, called. I did it. I made a bunch of calls. And again, no disrespect to the CMHA. No, none taken. But I tried. I phoned, and we tried to have conversations. And I was, again, just a number. And I was, and then I just gave up. I just said, okay, I got to deal with my own things right now. But the way you analyze it, the way you brought it to light, certainly made sense to me. Codependency. I was one of those at one time. At the later stages, I got out of that and understanding. I hated the addiction. I didn't ever hated my sister. Donna McCarthy has just made a very good comment. She was my sister's best friend. I really thank you for being on this. Are there certain diagnoses that predict addiction?
I see that she's wrote borderline personality disorder there.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's a cat out of the bag right there.
No, just before you answer that question, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
You're a part 2, part 3, part 4 type of interview, because I don't think we're going to get everything out. But I think what's important, and thank you, Chuck and Paul, for doing this. Adam Davis says here, Stephen Morris, you hit so many points in so many ways, lost for words. This show helps me every Monday in so many ways. You give it. This was supposed to be a sports show. That's what we designed this for. And Paul and I decided that we needed to branch out more. And I'll tell you what, I take that as a huge compliment. And Adam, we will be here every day for you if you're needed, no question. So first, thank you for that. So this show has become much more than that. And Chuck, thank you for approaching us with it. Now you can answer, Dave.
So there's, when it comes to certain diagnoses, I mean, it depends on how you look at diagnoses. I'm a bit more of a behaviorist, so diagnoses aren't, I'm not 100% keen on diagnoses. I think they give us a list of things that people do to try to cope. When you look at the parameters inside of what a diagnosis is. However, there are quite often, not always, there are quite often some good indicators as to if you know what substance a person prefers, you can generally have a good idea of what's going on underneath the surface. For example, alcohol is usually anxiety. Usually there's a lot of anxiety for people with alcohol because there's something about it that causes them that anxiety to drop and then makes them feel like, they fit in and those kind of things. Anybody who's dealing with stimulants, so obviously not everybody, but quite often if, cocaine and crystal meth, things like that, usually you're looking at some form of depression might be underneath there, particularly if you're dealing with a man who's got a lot of anger, because as men, we tend to express our sadness in anger because that sadness is weak. So we don't want to portray that we're sad. We'll just get angry at everybody to try to shut everything down. Oh, okay. So I want to look underneath that. Anger is also a coping mechanism and in my opinion is addictive too. So we have to, if you're dealing with a guy who's got a lot of anger and substance use issues, you're probably looking at some form of depression. Underneath that, what else have you got? Hallucinogens are usually they're a bit hit and miss, so people generally don't get too addicted to them because you can't predict what the outcome's going to be. When you're talking about trauma, though, quite often people who are dealing with trauma tend to gravitate towards opiates. So you're talking about morphine, heroin, fentanyl that's out there right now. Oxycontin, yeah.
Wow.
The reason for that is that usually when people have experienced, and again, this isn't like across the board, this is just more often than not. I'm not saying that everybody who deals with this stuff is going through this. Just in my experience, people who have dealt with a lot of trauma have a hard time feeling loved because of the things that they've experienced when they were children. When somebody uses opiates, it activates a certain neurotransmitter. There's a neurotransmitter that's involved in experiencing love that's called oxytocin. When somebody uses opiates, it kind of simulates that, but ramps it up 10 times. So this is quite often why people will say that when they use opiates, it felt like a warm hug. And wow. they suddenly know how love feels when they haven't experienced that as a child. So quite often there's a huge link between those two things. BPD is a really strange one. BPD, there's a lot of people who, borderline personality disorder was the question. Borderline personality disorder is one of those diagnoses that I think is, I've got to be careful how I word this. Personally, I believe that most people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder are probably dealing with massive amounts of childhood trauma, and that's their way of coping with it. So I think it's one of those diagnoses that can quite often close the door for treatment, and when in actual fact it should open the door for treatment.
Wow, in a nutshell,
Okay,
that's a lot to
listen.
take in.
Yeah, listen, we need a part two if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries.
Coming back with this good. What we're going to do now is we're just going to I'm going to give both Paul and Chuck an opportunity to make their final question or comment. I just wanted to say something. Number one, Chuck, I was off and I heard you say coffee addiction. You can't tell me to stop coffee. It's the only addiction I got.
Take it away, Gouche. Take
It's the
it away.
most
You'll be
abused
fine.
substance in North America.
It's the only thing I got, kid. But I'll
That's
tell you
all I
what,
got.
when I go to Australia, it's so strong, I'm off coffee. But I also wanted to state something, and I know, Chuck, you wanted to, we got a little bit personal, and I got personal because I'm so blessed that, Chuck, you did bring Stephen into our life, because it's comforting to know that it's different. There can't be a difference than what the textbook is, right?
Yeah.
And I think I lived with textbook. And I could tell you stories living at the hospital that would just blow your mind, and I will not deliver that today. But I would like to talk to you, Stephen, about that, because I think there is an opportunity for us to make change. And it's easy for all of us to just to say it's over. Paul still deals with it. I deal with it. Chuck, I'm not sure of your particular situation right at this moment, but I think we all deal with it. And I think it's time that people aren't afraid to speak up. I believe we have to personalize it. I think we need to be able to talk about our stories and say, look, here's my story. If we don't do that, people will just be caught back into that just being textbook. Because if you read a textbook, you can't judge the book by the cover. My life's been fantastic. I've had a great life. I've lost a mother. I've lost a father. I've lost a sister. Losing my sister is probably the hardest thing I ever went through. But yet I love my life. So I think when we look at the book, we have to get the story. And so what I wanted to say with that is that we need to talk. We need to connect. We need to communicate, but we need not to judge. And so I think after listening to you talk today and giving us a little bit of an understanding and just scratching the surface, I look forward to even more discussions, because I think it was all really well said by Stephen one more time. Adam has just made it so important for us to continue on and knowing what we're doing. And I think we are helping a lot. So thank you. Paul.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask a question now. I'm just going to say, Stephen, from what you just talked about with diagnosis and the different things, man, you got it so bang on. Like every time you said it, I was like, grabbing my head, getting a little emotional from what I've gone through, knowing what you said, bang on what some very close people in my life are right now through AA and through NA, and the amount of meetings I was going to before this pandemic started. I was going to between 6 and 7 meetings a week, and then boom, March 11th hits and there's nothing. So from what you said, you could not have been more bang on, and it's what recovering addicts need to hear, because I'm almost 19 months clean and sober, but I still have everyday issues that make me want to think about. And I'm never going to say I'm not going to ever. It's the easiest thing to say. I'm never going to have a drink again. I'm never going to have a pill again. I'm never going to do this again. I can't say that because I have no clue what next week's going to bring. But I do know that listening and talking, and especially now listening to people like you, it makes me understand things more than I've ever understood. And so for that, man, I thank you so much. And I can't wait to for part 2.
Paul, could that not be the fear of unknown, right? Because we didn't know.
Oh,
and this is some clarity.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. When he said, what the question that he would ask me if we were getting to have a one-on-one, about my addiction, it's like, why, it took away my pain.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
saw me. I played 10 years for Canada in 3 Paralympics, Stephen. And people saw me as this gold medal winner who did this. And they had no clue that when the door shut, what my life was.
Exactly.
And so, man, you couldn't have got it more bang on. It's just, I don't want to go any further because I don't want to get emotional right now. But you were bang on, brother. Bang on.
Absolutely.
Thanks, man.
Chuck.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so like I wanted to kind of give people a bit more insight to hope out there, because I mean, like right now, I think with COVID, we all need hope, and because I know you and you're one of my dearest friends, I want to put it back onto you because I know that you can answer this question that would give insight to other people for themselves. So, part one of the question is in the healing process, in dealing with your own personal trauma, which led you to be an addict, to be an alcoholic, into healing the void that was not there in your life, that you had to go back into and heal that. You and I have had conversations about, could you have another drink, or could you do another, set of substances and be okay with it? But more along the lines of like, I want you to speak to people about what your healing process was like, what you found out and discovered about yourself that made a difference, not only for you, because there's great people out there that can get sober, and getting sober is hard. Dealing with mental illness is hard. If you can do that, that's amazing. Then there's people that can go out there and actually get sober and then be functioning people back in society, and that's truly wonderful. Then there's people like you who can not only get your own demons out of the way, have your own family life, and then teach other people to get their lives back, just like how you got your life back, and be able to teach them how to heal. And the human soul that we go through, and everybody goes through it differently, but we all go through it at some level. So I wanted to ask you about your healing process and give it back to you about what your demons were, how you were able to heal that, and give it back to people how that, where you've gone, where they could be going as a possibility, instead of doing the work that you've had to do, which is enabled healing.
I have to be really careful on that, because much like Paul, I'll get really emotional if I start talking about some of the things that I went back and had to address. I mean, needless to say, it was a lot of stuff that where when I started doing this work for myself, like on myself, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of like self-criticism. The biggest part for me was learning how to embrace every single aspect of who I was, instead of hating certain parts of me for what they did. And that
Example of that?
I mean, there's lots of different examples. Who I was as a father to my oldest daughter was a huge one. I have 3 children now. 2 of them have never experienced me as a person who uses substances. The oldest one did. She was 4 when I stopped. She'll be 15 this year. Like dealing with being the deadbeat dad and the loser, and what I did around that, and being able to accept that those were the things that I did, but it doesn't say who I am now, and then embrace that part of me. That was one of the most, like, those are the most challenging things to do, because we're taught by society that if something's wrong, then it's bad and we need to get rid of it. I believe that with addiction, it's the other way. If something's wrong, we need to embrace it and learn how to welcome it, so it stops acting out the way that it is. And that's what makes the difference. And that's the hardest part, is embracing it.
Can I just add to that, Stephen? Thank you for that, because that enlightens a lot. I would so often say to my sister, can you not just look on that wall and see those 2 beautiful children you brought in this world? Is that not enough? I kept saying that month, day after day after day after day. And you know what? It wasn't enough, because she was hurting so much inside that we needed to deal with that. And Donna has just brought up an appointment, very important. Thanks, Paul, for your honesty. You're helping a lot of people. Chuck, by you bringing Stephen on today has been absolutely amazing. Great comment by Misty Tanner. Stephen, I've heard and read anger in men is a secondary emotion. I didn't know that. I thought anger was a taught behavior, right? I didn't realize that it could be something that would be an underlining cause for something else. So
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I went through, I had a lot of anger issues when I sobered up, and went through several, as Chuck will probably tell you, I went through several anger management programs that really didn't help me. And then I stumbled across a place that's no longer going, but they treat anger as an addiction. And when I started to look at it from that point of view and I started to do the work around that, I realized that it was a coping mechanism and it was a secondary emotion to all the other things that were going on underneath. And I was using anger to try to control what was going on out here because I couldn't control what was going on in here. And when I started to look at it from that term, I mean, I still deal with the anger, but it's nowhere near as powerful as it used to be.
Well, and I think too, people sharing their feelings. Ron Hughes from Brisbane, Australia. I'm a 12-year ex-smoker, and he still has cravings. And I would think that probably never goes away. It's a difficult. So with that, guys, Donna McCarthy is saying, what a great show. And it was a great show. And I look forward to part 2. The reason why I'm wearing Never Give Up is I want to honor Eric Pelly, who lost his life with the battle, and Joan Pelly. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. She lost her son many years ago. In closing, one thing that the underlying question or the underlying point that I heard today was, Paul, when you brought up the lies and that people are, it's amazing how convincing and how manipulative and how people like my sister and others that I've been around that had alcohol addictions and drug addictions, how they could tell the story. They knew that I knew it was a lie, yet they had the conviction to believe that it wasn't. It's amazing.
It's not a lie if you believe it yourself.
Yeah, it's true.
You know
right?
what? And I do believe that happened. I believe that certainly they didn't think it was an addiction or a lie. Listen, Stephen currently works at the addiction counselor, works as an addiction counselor at the Canadian Mental Health Association, Brampton. Thank you for that. Thank you for dealing with an issue that we have left alone for far too long. I love the perspective. Closing thoughts to you, Paul?
No, just thank you. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Can't wait till part 2, hopefully next Monday. But man, I learned a lot. I'm 60 years old, started my addiction journey in my teens, and I learned a lot from this hour with you, my friend.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump on that by just saying thanks, Steve, because I think if people have your view, and if you want that view, you can go to theliberationplace.com and get more than enough information of Steve's insights inside of your journeys and how they might occur for you. But he's done famously amazing work in the last 10 years. I'm just proud to call you a friend.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Here's a great shot of you obviously making a very important presentation. I look forward to meeting you personally. I look forward to following the Liberation Place and being a part of it, because you certainly have shed a light on a very important topic today. And I look forward to getting you back on very quickly to finish off part 2, to understand, go just a little bit deeper. We won't personalize it as much, but I'll tell you what, I can't thank you enough for what you've done for us today.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
See you, Stephen.
Wow.
That was, thanks, Chuck.
I've,
that was amazing.
Yeah, I love that guy.
I've had a lot of doctors, a lot of therapists, a lot of people talk to me through groups, through one-on-ones, through different things. But you can, when you've been through it long enough, you know when it's coming from here, and that's where it was coming from. Absolutely,
and I think it's a fresh. When you've been in it, as you know, it's fresh to me. It's not like it was 10 years ago. This is fresh. So it's still, when I hear people talk with the conviction that he has and the understanding that he has, you can't read this stuff in a book. You know, you can't just have a DR behind your name and be able to say, I get it. It's just like Paul knows it too. You know it yourself, Chuck, when it comes to concussions. Unless you've lived one, it's pretty tough to be able to say why we lived through what we lived through, right? And so I think that's what the important message is here, is that collectively all of us, including the importance of the medical world, coming together with advocates like ourselves, coming together with the drug manufacturers, coming together with the patients themselves, and sitting around and collectively putting a long-term plan together. Far too often we're putting Band-Aids on it. Karen's life was a Band-Aid. And I think we have to strip that Band-Aid away, and we have to get in and fix the problems that we have. And I think that's certainly today what I take away from it, what Stephen brought us.
Yeah, I think Steve is like
Steven.
If you've ever, Steven, yeah, so I call him Steve because he's a friend of mine, so I'll never call him
He's my
Steven.
friend too. I'm calling him Steve.
Yeah, but I mean, there's that one scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams just connects to Matt Damon in that role, and I think that if you've ever been in that chair, and if you've ever seen another human soul that actually gets your pain, understands how you got that, that journey to it, to give you a little bit of hope of what's that looks like in healing, because he's already gone through that himself and he can walk you through that there. That's really, really powerful stuff. And whether you're looking at Russell Brand or Gabor Mate, any of these people like Steven, that changes worlds and families.
Well,
Yeah,
Chuck, thank you. Unbelievable show. Paul, I'm going to see you in about 45 minutes. We're going to talk about we know what, to make light of it. We may be calling Steven later on tonight for a lot of Leaf fans if they don't get.
Don't even say that. Don't even say, because I know you're going to go with the number one draft pick, and if they get it, I'm going to jump off a cliff. I just don't want to do that. I don't want to have to jump off a cliff.
Hey,
I was up all night partying against the Leafs loss.
Call Steven if you're having issues, because the Jets are going to win it.
Jets are going to win it. If I have to give it to somebody, I want to give it. And you know what? This kid's got to be salivating, chomping at the bit.
Oh my God!
Number one pick has gone to a shitty team like the Detroit Red Wings, or the upstart Pittsburgh Penguins like Sidney Crosby, and now
Hang
this.
on, Chuck. I think you're being a little harsh. I think you're being. Detroit's not a shitty team.
When Crosby joined, they were.
Hey, all of these 8 teams that have the opportunity to get him, every one of these teams has something quality there.
100%.
Quality.
Oh, hang on. Time out.
What?
We're gonna have to call Steven if he goes to Minnesota.
And they still have some solid guys.
I know that, but it's freezing there. It's colder than Winnipeg.
Where do you come up?
Winnipeg? What, dude? Like, what's colder than Winnipeg? It's colder than.
I'll tell you what. That's
Mars.
not true. I'm upset at you guys because I'm from Winnipeg.
So am I.
No, I know that. But I can tell you right now, I can't remember the little city outside of Winnipeg, out of Minnesota. True story. Out of Minneapolis, minus 57. Okay. I was there with Sebastian.
So hold on a second. So it's minus 57 in Minnesota and it's minus 49 in Winnipeg. Who gives a shit? It's freezing.
Yeah, it's minus 49 on Mars. It's colder in Winnipeg than it is on Mars.
I don't like you guys anymore. Okay, boys.
That's why I left Winnipeg.
We'll talk about this before the actual. They go to the TV and decide when Bill Daly pulls the thing who's getting it. But I really, 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 really think that the Winnipeg Jets are getting the number 1 pick.
If the Leafs get it, it's fixed. And you heard me say that first. If the Leafs get it, it's fixed.
I got to go, guys. I got to go pick my wife up, get back in this seat at 6 o'clock because this is going to be fun. So, Chuck, I'm going to send you the link after it's all announced. Yeah. We'll bring you back on, and then you're gonna be crying when it's the Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's fixed if it's the Leafs. They spent money. That's what they did.
All right, guys.
See you in a little bit.
See you guys. Have a good week.